You know that moment when a team member walks into your office and says, "We've got a problem." And somehow by the end of the conversation, it's now on your to do list. And you're the one solving, firefighting, managing, and everyone else on the team gets to breathe out because you've taken it on. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. It's one of the most common frustrations I hear from the leaders I coach. Why can't my team take ownership? The good news, this is not a personality issue, it's neuroscience. And today I'm going to show you why the brain defaults to dependency and how you can rewire for ownership and initiative without micromanaging or burning yourself out. I'm Tania Adams. I'm a neuroscience based executive and high performance coach. And for the past 17 years, I've coached CEOs, senior leaders, and directors across multiple industries who are brilliant at strategy but are exhausted by the mental load of leadership. My work blends neuroscience, psychology, and very practical leadership systems, helping you to lead calm, confident, and high performing teams that think for themselves. So, when I hear a leader say, "My team keeps bringing me problems instead of solutions," I know exactly what's happening in their team's brains and in their brains. When this happens repeatedly, it's not just annoying, it's draining. You end up carrying everyone else's emotional load and cognitive load. But underneath the surface, this isn't actually about laziness or incompetence. It's about how the brain handles threat, reward, and uncertainty. So let's unpack what's actually happening neurologically when people dump problems upward. The first thing to be aware of is the brain's natural threat response. When people feel unsure of being wrong, their amygdala lights up, and its only job is to keep those people safe. So it pushes them to avoid responsibility. If I tell my boss, it's her problem now, I'll be safe. It's not rebellion, actually, it's protection. The second thing to be aware of is the learned helplessness loop. Every time you fix an issue for one of your team, their brain gets a small dopamine hit of relief. And that relief actually becomes addictive and forms a loop that starts with problem occurs, we dump it on our upline leader, and relief comes and we repeat. And that's all that happens problem, dump, relief, repeat. And you are accidentally reinforcing this dependency at a neural level every time you solve a problem for one of your team members. Thirdly, and we all have this, is a cognitive ease bias. The brain loves shortcuts. The brain is an energy conserving machine because it uses 20% of the body's entire energy resources. It's constantly thinking about how to save energy. And thinking deeply about problems burns glucose. If the leader is always doing the heavy lifting, the team's prefrontal cortex learns that it doesn't even have to engage, and therefore it gets to save energy. The fourth thing to consider, and this is almost an unintended consequence of the way organizations are set up. There is a status and reward confusion that starts to happen when we solve our team's problems. In hierarchical structures, often attention from the boss feels like a win to the team member. So if they get that dopamine hit as a reward by escalating a problem upward, they're going to keep doing it. And you have to rewire what's rewarded if you want to break this loop. Lastly, we have the mirror neuron effect. The human brain is designed to be socially wired, and one of the hardware components of the brain that helps with this is something called mirror neurons. And if you are the one that's constantly modeling and doing the problem solving, your team learns to mirror that behavior. So if you are stuck in problem solving mode rather than in leadership mode, they continually find the problems rather than finding solutions because that's what they've seen you model. So they watch your brain in action and learn helplessness from the example. So, how do you change this as the leader? Here's the hard truth: you cannot coach ownership while rewarding dependency. And that might sound tough, though it is the truth. And this, as a leader, is about taking ownership yourself for the way that you are inadvertently leading. Every time you rescue, you confirm for your team that helplessness works. In neuroscience terms, your role is not to rescue, it's to regulate. You need to regulate your own impulse to jump in and solve, regulate their nervous system so that they can move forward from amygdala reactivity to prefrontal clarity. Because the brain moves towards what it associates with reward and away from what it associates with threat or pain. So, what needs to happen as a leader is it's your job to make thinking feel safe and taking initiative feel rewarding. Let's take a look at how to do that. How to train your team's brain, not just their skills. I'm going to give you 5 very practical, very easy to implement techniques that you can start using today, the next time you have somebody walk into your office and hand over their problems to you. The first one, interestingly, and this is perhaps the hardest one of all, is to interrupt your own rescuer loop. Your brain gets a dopamine hit from being the hero. This is not because you have a big ego. This is because that's how the brain works. It's not you, it's your brain. So acknowledge that this is going to happen, that particularly if this has been an ongoing problem, your brain has associated someone giving you their problem with you getting to feel good about yourself, getting to feel like the hero. Know it up front, and then the minute somebody walks into your office, stop. Pause, take a big deep breath in through your nose, out through your mouth, and just this 2-second pause allows your brain to reset itself and engage your prefrontal cortex so that you can move on to step 2. Step 2 then is when the problem is presented to you, resist the urge to jump in and solve. Having already reset your prefrontal cortex into active mode, you're now in a position to ask questions rather than give answers. And remember, your job is this, it's to encourage your team to think rather than to think for them. The reason you've hired these people is for their brains, and it's important to learn how to activate their brains. How can you do this? Once you've done your reset and your prefrontal cortex has come online, ask questions. What options have you considered already? And here's my personal favorite. If I wasn't here, what would you do? These 2 questions help your team member move out of amygdala firing, which is caused by the perceived threat of the problem, and into their own prefrontal cortex, which is where reasoning and executive function happen. As I mentioned, it's important to make taking initiative and ownership safe and rewarding. The third step here is to reinforce ownership verbally. Try phrases like, "You're closest to this, and I trust your judgment. Bring me 2 options and tell me which one you prefer." In that moment, you're teaching the brain of your team member that autonomy is safe and that trust will be rewarded. And this starts to create the psychological safety that's needed for your team to begin to take ownership and to operate from their prefrontal cortex, not from their amygdala. Then the fourth step is to model solution thinking, not problem solving. And there is a subtle difference. It may sound very similar, though they are completely different perspectives. Problem solving, the attention focus is on the problem. Solution finding, the attentional focus is on solutions. And this addresses the mirror neurons issue. If you are problem solving, your team are problem focused. If you are solution finding, your team will become solutions focused. So you can model solutions thinking by sharing, here's what I notice. Here's 3 things that I can see that might be effective. Here's what I might test first. Tell me what your thinking is about these solutions. And that language starts to build neural templates for critical thinking for your team. And you are then teaching them how to think about a solution rather than dwelling on a problem. And finally, this is what I used effectively with my teams when I was in corporate leadership. My team actually knew that this was the culture of our team. And I was very explicit and clear with it from a verbal perspective. And in fact, when people came into my office who might have forgotten or gotten themselves back stuck in their problem loop, I would remind them when they came in the office. And this is very simple simply around creating a team culture that's verbalized. In this team, we don't bring problems without at least one path forward. We focus on solutions. And then this is critical because we want to reward the correct behavior, celebrate those who bring the solutions publicly. When we celebrate people publicly for doing what we want them to do, they get social recognition. And this is an important part of the way our brains are wired, and it reinforces the dopamine. Not only do they receive their own internal dopamine hit, but they also then start to activate neurochemicals like oxytocin, which keeps them bonded to the group when the group responds to them. And it starts to create a virtuous upcycle of people starting to seek out how do they get that recognition? How did they get that dopamine hit? So you'll notice an energy shift quite quickly, I would expect, in about 1 to 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, if you are consistent with this. And I will remind you that the first step is probably going to be the hardest, which is to recognize your own rescuer bias, purely a habit that you've gotten into, and to interrupt that before the conversation goes into problem solving and take the conversation into the direction of solutions finding. So the next time someone comes into your office with a problem, remember this. They're not being difficult. Their brain is seeking safety. In fact, one of my favorite phrases is the person is not the problem is the problem. And our job as leaders is to find the solution. So say it again with me. The person is not the problem is the problem. What is the solution? And your power as a leader exists in redirecting and creating safety without rescuing your people. They are capable. You wouldn't have hired them if they weren't. So when their brain learns that thinking is what gets rewarded, not dumping, they will start to do more of that. And when you change how your brain leads, you also change the way your team's brains follow your leadership. If any of this resonates and you're ready to lead a team that takes initiative instead of waiting for permission, this is exactly what I help senior leaders do and rewire in my one-on-one executive coaching practice. We use these kinds of neuroscience techniques to transform leadership habits from reactive to intentional so that you build calm, accountable, and high ownership, high performing teams. If you would like to have a conversation with me about how this works, click the link below to book a private conversation with me, and we'll unpack to understand how I can support you and what actually needs to happen to rewire you and your team to the type of teams that you desire. If you enjoyed this video and you like this kind of work, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I produce one of these videos every single week, and you can catch up on neuroscience related tips and techniques for business leadership and business success. I'd love to hear in the comments what stood out for you today and what are you going to implement first to help your teams take ownership and initiative and become the high performance teams that you know that they can be. I read every single comment myself and I respond to it. So go ahead and comment in the chats. What are you going to implement as soon as you get back to the office after watching this? I look forward to seeing you on the channel or in a private conversation with me to book some time to talk about one-on-one coaching to help you become a rewired leader that leads a team that's performing and takes ownership.